It's my pleasure as being part of the Personnel Committee to recognize our pastor's anniversary coming up next week, which is 6 years, I believe. And as I have a token of appreciation for him, and I just want to thank him on behalf of you folks for 6 years. Thank you, Pastor.
Well, you're just doing that in hopes that I'll preach shorter. Declined. No, thank you for that. Thank you for giving me and my family the pleasure, sincerely, and the honor of being able to serve the Lord alongside you for these 6 years. It's hard to believe that's 2 children ago for us. And so that's real. In fact, today, though, the most significant thing about this day for me is that today is our 12th wedding anniversary as well. And so it's hard to believe. 12 years ago, I made Caroline the most lucky woman in the world. But in truth, though, it's easy for me to be so regularly on the receiving end of your gracious response and expressions of affection. In truth, it's her sacrifice that enables me to do what it is that God has called me to, and it's very much a team effort. And so I'm grateful not only to serve the Lord alongside you, but in particular to do so alongside her. That being said, though you might not have bought any of them, Christmas decorations have been now in the stores for weeks, back even in September. Can we not all agree that there ought to be some type of law against Christmas decorations in September in the stores? Why are no presidential candidates talking about this? That's at least as important as the stuff they are talking about, right? But they've been in the stores, and in truth, though, it's not going to be long. I mean, time seems to pass so quickly. In short order, we're going to be looking Christmas right at our doorstep here within the next month or so. So many of you, and certainly here at the church, will begin putting out decorations. And I recognize that for many people, and maybe you're part of this group, for some people, Christmas decorations are a big, big deal. There are those, you may be one of them, whose attic is absolutely filled with Christmas decorations. Some people I know of have entire storage buildings or even rent storage units to hold all of their Christmas decorations. Of course, there's the tree or the trees that people set up. There's garland that may go over doors or on top of cabinets or stuff like that. There's manger scenes, and some homes will have multiple manger scenes, big and small. There's those Christmas villages, which, what are those? Out of date. Thank you, Betty. Yes, so if you but many people love and collect these Christmas villages, and they'll have entire tables filled with those things. You've got some people who have pictures, Christmas pictures that only come out around Christmas time. They'll take the regular pictures off the wall and put these other pictures up just for the month of December. Some of you look kind of shocked. I know these people. Some may be even in this room. But there's all of that stuff that goes inside. And then there's decorations that go outside. There's lights that people may put on their shrubbery or to line the edges of the house. There's wreaths that go on doors and windows. There's those deer made out of vines. Some of them are lit. They come in brown, they come in white. If you're maybe a fan a little bit more of the tacky, you've got some of the inflatable yard art that goes up as well. But there's all of these decorations that so many people put up. As for me, in my house, we put up a Christmas tree and nothing else. We just put a tree up. And it didn't used to be that way. I remember at our last house in Charlotte, we had a tree that we had in the living room, and then we had 2 smaller trees in the den. On top of the cabinets in the kitchen, we had some lit garland. Outside, we had some wreaths with bows on them on each of the windows, and then a wreath on the door. And our house was white, and so I had a light out in the yard that was shining on the house at night. It was beautiful. It was lovely. Anyway, we used to do all of that, but now all we do is a tree. A tree. Why is that? Well, part of it, and many of you can testify to this, for all of the excitement and the enthusiasm that you feel in putting out and setting up Christmas decorations, double that and make it the opposite when you're taking it down. Isn't that depressing? And it's just horrible. It's as if somebody has died. It's just terrible, that whole process of having to take down and put away all of that stuff. And so there's that factors in our minds, so we don't want to have to do all that. The other thing is we've got 5 kids, and that in itself is demanding. Our responsibilities, in particular my responsibilities here at the church, are demanding, and we've got enough pulling on us, enough other obligations and responsibilities that Caroline and I are both like, yeah, I'm just not interested in anything else. A Christmas tree will do. I'm not interested, not desiring. It's not worth it to do anything more. It's not worth it to do anything more. Hold that thought for a moment, though, and consider this fact. Again, today is the 42nd anniversary of Gate City as a fellowship. So 42 years ago, this church began. My mother was 3 months pregnant with me 42 years ago. I'll be 42 in February, so the church is 6 months older than I am. There's some of you who have been here the entire length of that time. Others have been here, some for multiplied decades, some for just a few weeks. But regardless of how long you have been here, so many of you here this morning are part of this church, actively engaged and plugged in. And on this day, I would ask you this question: why? Why do this? Why be invested? Why be connected? Why be plugged in? Why served? Why do we do this? Why, more specifically, do you do this? You say, well, Michael, that's kind of a dumb question. And I would argue that it's really not a dumb question. I would argue in particular on a day such as this that it's a really important question, because if it hasn't, at some point you're going to have to struggle with the answer to that question. Things will happen, circumstances will be encountered and experienced where you will ask, why do I keep doing this? Why do I do this? It's important then that you would have a good answer. Well, as you think about that, if I were to go a step further and ask you to take out a piece of paper and a pen or pencil and write down your answer to that question, why do you do this? Why be involved not simply in a church, but in particular this church, plugged in its various ministries? If I were to give you some time to write down those answers, and if I were to get all of those sheets back and begin to tally up those responses, I think some of those responses we would see over and over and over again. For example, I think out of the gate, one of the things that many of you would list is the excellence in preaching. I get that. I understand that. You wouldn't be alone. Others of you, though, would cite particular ministries or ministry areas of the church that have been particularly meaningful to you. For some, that would be children or youth or young adult or women's ministry or seniors or music. But some of the various ministries of the church, over time, these have been particularly impacting and meaningful to you. And so you would say, part of the reason, in fact, maybe even the primary reason that I do this is because of that particular ministry. It has really impacted me. It's had a real positive impact and net gain in my life. In all likelihood, though, one of the things that would be listed over and over and over again are the relationships that you have. People. That, in particular, if you've been here for any length, really, of time, As you've served together, you've gotten to know people, you've built real and meaningful relationships with other people. In fact, some of you would say, and I think perhaps even many of you would say, that there are people that are in this room today that are actually closer to you than members of your own family. You'd probably say that. I see some heads nodding. You'd say that's true. And so for you, a primary motivation as to why you do this, it's the people. It's the people. About all of these reasons, and I want you to hear me in this, those are good things. I think it's positive that you would say, and I would hope that any who are a part of this church would say, there are ministries that have really had a significant and a positive impact on me and my family. There are aspects of the worship service that really encourage me and speak to me on a weekly basis. I would hope that you would be able to say that there are people in this church with whom you're not just a member of the group, but you're really a part of the family, and they're a part of your family. Even though you don't share the same mother, you've got the same Heavenly Father, and they're as close to you as if you had grown up together. I think all of those are good and positive things. It is good for people to have real and meaningful relationships. Good for people to have ministry groups that really speak to and impact me and impact you. It's good for us to list these things and have as positive realities and have positive feelings about them. But hear me also in this. If those things that we've just listed, if those are the primary reasons that you continue to do this, that's troublesome. If those are your primary motivations as to why you're involved, connected, plugged in to this or any other church, I would argue that is a troublesome reality. But why? All of those things that we just listed, whether you noticed it or not, hopefully you could agree with me that they share a common denominator. Maybe if I phrased it this way, you would see it. I like the preaching. I like the music. I like that particular ministry area. This particular aspect of the ministry of this church benefits me and my family. I enjoy this particular ministry. Do you notice the common thread? I, me, my. All of those things at the end of the day revolve around us and just our experience. And it's troublesome if the primary motivation that you're connected to this, involved in, and serving in this church are those reasons. That is a troublesome reality. I say that for two reasons. One, suppose you had listed all of those things on your sheet of paper and said, these are the reasons, the primary reasons I do all of this. Suppose instead of showing me your list, you were to show the Lord your list. What do you think He would say about it? I mean, honestly, do you think as God looked at all of the reasons for which you are connected to and involved in the ministry of this church is because of what you get out of it, because of how much you like it, because of how much you enjoy it? Can we just agree that the Lord would be less than thrilled because none of those things involve Him in the equation? I think we'd have to say that God may have a problem with that. But there's another reason that those things are troublesome. And that's this. They're all subject to change. They're all subject to change. Let's say there's a particular aspect of the ministry of this church that you really like. Maybe it's music. Maybe you're part of the choir and you really enjoy that. Rehearsals and practices, you find those to be very meaningful. You like singing as a part of the worship service. But suppose that changed. Suppose the style of music or the blend of music that we were doing changed, and if that happened, would you still like it? What if we started singing songs you didn't like? Maybe you say, well, Michael, I do like and I kind of connect with how it is that you preach. I hope you're aware of the fact that preachers come and they go. They really do. Sometimes it is that God leads a pastor to another place of service, but at the end of the day, all preachers die. Some of them go to heaven. So that's subject to change. Maybe it's another particular area. Maybe it's student ministry or children's ministry. What if that particular ministry area changed its direction or changed the tune and how it is that it operated? Maybe it is that you wouldn't like it so much. And maybe it is that you said, it's the people, it's the relationships that I have that are most meaningful. That's the primary motivation as to why I do this. I hope you're aware of the fact that the people that you love so dearly today, a month from now, could be making you fighting mad. They could say something that hurts your feelings. They could forget your birthday. They could not invite you to an event. And though you are thrilled with them at the moment, they could be a source of real and potentially devastating hurt in the future. Taken together, when these things are what motivates you to be part of, plugged in, and serving in the local church, you are, hear me in this, you're subject at any point to just walk away. After all, if the reason that you are here are those reasons that we have just listed, when those reasons change, and over time they will change, it'll be easy, so easy, just to walk away. And not simply walk away from Gate City, but potentially even to walk away from the Lord. On this day where we do pause and think about the blessing that it is that this church exists and the blessing it is personally for us to be a part of it, we do well, again, to step back and ask the question, why do this? Why do this? And if your answers thus far are those reasons, we do well to say, well, what would be a better reason? What's a reason that doesn't completely revolve around me, and what's a reason that will not change? Well, I think we've got a good biblical case for what an answer or a motivation like that would actually look like. We see it in just one verse of Scripture that's found in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 14. You can look there, or it's so short you can just listen to it. Paul says this, "For the love of Christ compels us." The love of Christ compels us. Everything that Paul was engaged in, from traveling about and planting churches, to the sometimes correction or disciplining of other believers, to the personal evangelism that he engaged in, to the teaching and the training and the developing and the raising up of leaders within the early church. Everything that Paul did, why he did this, why he did church, Paul would say, here's my motivation. 2 Corinthians 5:14, the love of Christ compels me. The love of Christ compels me. Isn't it interesting? That doesn't revolve around him. It revolves around the Lord. And it's not subject to change because the love of Christ does not change. Maybe that's a better motivation. Everything that Paul did, it was motivated. He was compelled by, driven by, constrained by, driven by the love of Christ. Now, this simple statement, though, does pose for us a slight interpretive challenge. He says, the love of Christ compels us. And the question is this: which direction is the love going? Is Paul talking about Christ's love for him, or is Paul saying his love for Christ? And there are commentators who have gone on to discuss and to argue at great length as to why it is one versus the other, when in truth, I think what he was communicating is not either or, but both and. It is God's love through Christ for him, and it is his love for Christ that is his singular motivation. That's what drove him. That's what got him up every day. And not simply to do the work of ministry, but to do so in the face of real adversity. Paul was motivated, he says, because the love of Christ compels me. I believe Paul was not simply keenly aware, but I think he was shaken to his core because of the extent to which he understood Christ's love for him. And I get the fact, and I understand this, hopefully you do as well, that Paul's got a particularly notable story of his experience before Christ, one that you probably have not had. And that is that before he was Paul the apostle, he was Saul the persecutor. And his active day-to-day job was to persecute the Christian church, to make it tough, to make it difficult, and hopefully impossible for this whole Christian thing to spread. Actively engaged in not simply persecuting, but even bringing about the execution of Christians. Yet it was this same man who had this amazing experience on the road to Damascus, where Christ helped Paul to see, this is who I really am. It was on the road to Damascus that Paul came to discover he really, really loves me. Because in spite of all this stuff, this horrible stuff that I have done, he's not anxious to wash his hands of me. He wants me to know that Christ died to pay the penalty for the wrongs that I have done. Christ died, and he died for me. And not simply that, but he loves me enough, not simply to enable me to have a relationship with him, but he loves me enough that he wants to use somebody with a story like mine in his service. I think sincerely Paul was shaken to the core with his understanding of the breadth and the height and the depth of Christ's love for him. If you're here today, you might not have had the story of Saul of Tarsus, but regardless of what you have done and the ways in which you have failed the Lord, I want you to know of his love for you. That Christ endured and took on himself a punishment that I deserved, that you deserved, so that you could know him, so that you could have a personal relationship with him. And what he did in Saul of Tarsus' life, he can do in yours. I really think Paul was sincerely touched, and he was shaken to his core because of his awareness, keen awareness of Christ's love for him. Paul was motivated because he knew how much Christ loved him. But I think it's true for us that we can look back, because 13 of the 27 books of the New Testament were penned by the Apostle Paul, and it's easy for us to look and say, man, this is somebody that really loved Christ. It really is. It's unmistakable that the ministry that Paul engaged himself in was one that was rooted in a deep personal affection for the Lord. Otherwise, why in the world would Paul keep going on after he had been beaten? Why not abandon Christ at the threat of execution? Why not just walk away from the Lord and walk away in an abandoned service? Quit doing this when 3 times he said, Lord, will you take this thorn in the flesh, whatever that was, will you take this from me? And 3 times the Lord said, no. Why would he keep going on? Because he was motivated by the love of Christ. He was shaken to his core with just how much he knew Christ loved him. And it was that motivated his love for Christ. If you were to ask Paul the question that I posed to you earlier, why do you do this whole Christian, why do you do this whole church thing? I think Paul's answer would be very simple. It'd be 4 words: the love of Christ. Why do I do this? Because I am compelled by, driven by his love for me and my love for him. It's interesting, the word that Paul uses here that's translated as compelled. It's a verb that refers to pressure that confines, that restricts and controls. And I think if you put all that together, Paul is giving us this picture. It's Christ's love that motivates me, that gets me up in the morning, that I keep doing this whole Christian thing, that I keep doing this whole church thing. And not only does it motivate me, but it directs and prompts my focus so that there are things that I do that I otherwise wouldn't because of the love of Christ. Conversely, there are things that I do not do that I otherwise would because I am compelled by the love of Christ. It was back in the spring that I had shared with you a message that I felt sincerely the Lord had birthed in my heart as it relates to the vision and the direction that we are going as a church. Not only a dream of what could be, but a sense of vision as to what it is that should be. And since that time back in late April, you have heard me time and time again say this. You have seen it. If you read the stuff that we put out and that we publish, you have read it over and over again, and my hope is that you haven't checked out from it. But how we phrased the statement was this: the love of Christ compels us to share with others how to know and follow Jesus and to celebrate the difference He can make in the life of a person and a family. Hopefully you didn't miss those first few words. The love of Christ compels us. Hear me in this. If it is not that motivates us, we will not do those other things. It's the love of Christ that compels us to share with others. That's evangelism. About how to know Jesus. It's the love of Christ that compels us to share with others how to know and follow Jesus. That's discipleship. It's the love of Christ that compels us to celebrate. That's worship. The difference that He can make in the life of a person. That's individually and more specifically in a family. What we're saying is that this, even if it's not presently where you are, where it needs to be, is that the single ultimate thing that motivates everything that we do and everything it is that God has called us to as a church, the singular thing that has to motivate that is the love of Christ. Why? Because if it is not, we will not do it. If your ultimate motivation and why you do this whole church thing is because of the relationships that you have with people, you will never share the good news with somebody that's not a part of the group. Why? Because you're so happy, you're so content with those that make up your friend unit. But you'll be driven outside of that by the love of Christ. What compels our worship services to be something far more than just mindless, meaningless, trite routine over and over without any engagement is when the love of Christ motivates it. When I am shaken to my core with an understanding, a clear understanding of the depth of His love for me, that causes me when I sing to not just sing, "Great is thy faithfulness," but you're able to sing it personally because I know of His love for me. Great is your faithfulness, O God, my Father. That shakes me. You didn't just make me a Facebook friend. You didn't make me an acquaintance. You made me your son. You made me your daughter. If we are to ever achieve what it is that God has called us to, not simply as individuals, but specifically as a church, it has to be the singular motivation that drives us in everything that we do. The love of Christ. The love of Christ. Coming to grips with just how much He loves me, and in response, me developing an unshakable love for Him. And in truth, that's the order, isn't it? What does the New Testament tell us? That we love because He first loved us. And when we start to understand how much we are loved by Him, it prompts this amazing, loving response from Him that can, could, and should motivate everything we do. Occasions such as this, where on a homecoming weekend we celebrate the years of existence as a church family. These are understandably and naturally occasions where we look back. Some of you might have even, in between Sunday school and worship service, been talking about something that happened 30 years ago. As Daniel was sharing a moment ago, maybe you were thinking back to keeping him in the nursery or being his RA leader. And you're thinking back about all of these things that have happened, that did occur, looking in the rearview mirror. What all it is that's a part of our history. There is absolute benefit in looking back. But understand, our past cannot and must not be our primary concern. It must be a focus on our future that has a singular motivation that everything we do is because the love of Christ compels us. The future of this or any other church and the extent to which it accomplishes its God-given mission of what could be and should be is inextricably linked, and I would argue entirely linked to its motivation. Why we do what we do. So on this day where we celebrate 42 years as a fellowship, and however long you've been a part of this group, my question for you is not simply thus far, but going forward, why do this? Why do this? Why be connected? Why be involved? Why plug in? You can have all sorts of reasons. You can have reasons that change. You can have reasons that revolve around you. But I want you to know that God's looking for a different reason. He's looking for a reason that was communicated so clearly by Paul. The love of Christ compels me. When we started, maybe you had an answer that you said, this compels me. Is it that God is speaking to your heart to say, listen, it's time to change your motivation? Will you bow your heads with me? Why do this?